Matthew 17, reading from the New American Standard. Could not do what we do were it not for the volunteers and staff members of our church. Let's stand to our feet to welcome all of our guests with a rousing round of applause. And let's all stand for the reading of the Lord's word. Matthew 17, verse 14, down through verse 20. Let's read these verses together. When they came to the crowd, a man came up to Jesus, falling on his knees before him and saying, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is a lunatic and is very ill. Some of y'all praying right now, Lord, I got one of them at the house. This is different. He is a lunatic and is very ill, for he often falls into the fire and often into the water. I brought him to your disciples, and they could not cure him. And Jesus answered and said, now watch this now. The man came to Jesus. His boy is possessed with a demon spirit. The demon tries to burn the child to death or drown the child. We'll see later on that this demon would come and go. And whenever the demon would leave, it would always leave violently. It wouldn't leave freely. There was always violence involved in the demon's leaving. The man brings his boy looking for Jesus. Jesus is not present because he is gone with three of his other disciples, Peter, James, and John. They're up on a mountain having a mountaintop experience. 9 other disciples down in the valley. And the man said, I can't get Jesus, but I'll get the closest thing to him. And he says to his disciples, please cure my son. And the disciples could not cast the demon out. Finally, the following day, Jesus shows up, and the man rushes to Jesus and explains to him his boy's condition. Tells Jesus that your disciples could not cast him out. And then he asks Jesus, if you can do anything, do something to help my son. So ordinarily when I read this, I feel so sorry for the dad. I feel so sorry for the son. I feel sorry for the disciples until you read Jesus's response. Jesus's response is in verse 17. And Jesus answered and said, you unbelieving and perverted generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring him here to me. And Jesus rebuked him, and the demon came out of him, and the boy was cured at once. Then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, why could we not drive it out? And he said to them, because of the littleness of your faith. For truly I say to you, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible to you. I want you to turn to your neighbor and shout to them, just a little faith, goes a long way. Got a neighbor on the other side, shout to them, just a little faith, goes a long way. Amen. You may be seated in the Lord's presence. This record of deliverance is found in all 3 of what we call the synoptic gospels. That's the first 3 gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. This same story is told in all 3 gospels. I recommend that when you get home that you read all 3 gospel accounts. The first is right here in Matthew 17. The second is in Mark chapter 9. And the third is in Luke chapter 9. You got to really read all 3 of them to build a complete picture of how miraculous Jesus's behavior is in Matthew chapter 17. By way of introduction, because what Jesus questions as it relates to these individuals, he said that the reason they could not cast this demon out is because their faith was too small. I wonder this morning, what is it in your life and mine that could have been kicked out a long time ago, but our faith is too small? What doors has God been trying to open for you that you have simply been too afraid to walk through because your faith is too small? There are millionaires sitting right here in this room, but you can't tell when you look at your bank account. And it is all because your faith is too small. And Jesus said, even if you had a little bit, it could go a long way. And I don't want us to leave here today without understanding how to tap into that kind of faith that can move mountains. Now, I'm not talking about going to a church and getting you a bottle of oil, because if you're not careful, you can leave there excited, but you leave the same way that you came. I was listening to a preacher this past week. He said some of us are anointed and greasy, and that's all. No deliverance, no real change, no real manifestation of what we are believing God for. But I was blown away by the fact that Jesus says if I can get my faith right, there are some mountains that I can speak to, and the mountain has got to get out of my way. I want to mention two things by way of introduction as it relates to this subject of faith. To find these answers, we won't see them in Matthew 17. We'll come back to that later. But in Hebrews chapter 11 in verse 6, and we want to look at this from the King James Version. In Hebrews chapter 11 verse 6, we're given some covenant information on what we should understand about faith. The word faith is taken from the Greek word pistis. It is spelled Pistis. And let me give you a definition of faith. What does faith look like? How does faith behave? It might take you a minute to write it down. I didn't give it to Sister Renita to put it on the screens. But here's a great definition of faith. Because faith is not believing alone. Because in James chapter 2 and verse 20, the Bible says that faith without works is dead. You can tell me all day long about what you believe, but if what you believe does not change the way you behave, then what good is your belief? I'm believing God for a new job and I ain't filled out no application. I'm believing God for a new career and don't even have a resume put together. Are you really believing God? I'm believing God to lose 10 pounds in the next 10 days. All them sodas you drinking? You can't believe him enough to put the sodas down. You got a potato chip dispenser hanging over your bed. And every time you want a chip, you just beat on it. And sour cream and onion chips just fall right down out of the sky. Here's a definition of faith. Your active obedience to whatever God has said. Your active obedience to whatever God has said. Faith without works is dead. That means you got to be actively obedient to whatever God has said. Let me share two things with you by way of introduction from Hebrews 11 in verse 6 in the King James Version. Here's the first one. Faith pleases God. Faith pleases God. Which means when you are active actively obedient to what God has said, it makes God happy. I can give you a whole list of things that make me happy. A Starbucks Frappuccino, the mocha kind, with decaf and soy, no whipped cream, makes me very happy. Banana pudding, when you follow the instructions on the side of the Nilla wafers box. I'm not talking about how this new age crowd makes it. No, the instructions on the side of the Nilla wafers box, and you can't use cracking good cookies. You got to use real Nilla wafer cookies. Coca-Cola in Jesus' name. Makes me happy. A bone-in ribeye steak makes me happy. Seeing people blessed makes me happy. What really moves God, you say, Pastor, all that stuff you mentioned, most of it was food. You're right. What makes God happy, what pleases God is faith. Faith pleases God. Look at how he explains it in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 6. He says, without faith, it is impossible to please him. That means that faith pleases God. Not only is that true, it is also true that faithlessness displeases God. Faith pleases God, but faithlessness displeases God. What hurts God's feelings is believers who won't take him at his word. You hurt God's feelings when he speaks to you and tells you what he wants you to do, and either out of fear or laziness or stubbornness or complacency, you stay where you are. You hurt God's feelings. When God says, I want to bless you up here, and you say, Lord, I'm all right down here, you grieve the very heart of God. I want to unpack that statement in at least 4 different ways. This idea that faithlessness displeases God. Let me unpack that in 4 different ways, all found in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 6. Here's the first way. We must not struggle with the identity of God. See, you're going to have a hard time believing God for what he says if you don't believe that God is. And if you're wrestling with whether or not God is real, certainly you're not going to be obedient to what God says. So you've got to move beyond struggling with the identity of God. The Bible says, without faith it is impossible to please him, for he that cometh to God must believe that he is. God says you got to settle it in your mind that I am God, that you cannot have a creation without a creator. You can't have a building without a builder. You can't have a watch without a watchmaker. There must be a God somewhere. Have you ever thought about how complex our human bodies are? I don't know if I'll get to finish this this morning. I'm going to finish on time, but I don't know if I'll get to finish this whole message. I was praying about that thing this week, and I said this needs to be part 1 and part 2. Then I thought about the fact that Father's Day is next Sunday, so this may have to be for the day after Father's Day when you get it all, because I don't want you to choke. I don't want you to choke or pass out. Y'all are the funniest saints I have ever seen in my life, especially on Wednesday night. Y'all so funny. It's hilarious, especially on Wednesday night. I'm sure it happens on Sunday morning. I just don't get to see it as much. I push myself, Minister Doug, to be very timely on Sunday morning and on Wednesday night. Wednesday night service, we start at 7, we end at 8, unless y'all give me an extra 5 minutes. Here's what's funny. Sometimes I don't leave the church till 45 minutes later, and y'all still be out there in the parking lot. And the first thing I say to myself is, I could have went another 30 minutes. If I'd have known they had nowhere to go, I'm trying to be timely. And they ain't trying to go home no how. They're not tired of here, they're just tired of me. That ain't it. Okay, good. Y'all be gone though, y'all get out of here. Y'all, you don't go nowhere else. We must not struggle with the identity of God. You've got to believe that God is. Have you ever thought about how complex our human bodies are? That a man connects with a woman, fertilizing eggs, creating an embryo that grows on the inside of the mother into a whole person. What the mother consumes feeds and nourishes the child, yet the child has lungs but doesn't breathe. But the moment the child is born, they start the breathing process. Well, how is it 5 minutes ago you weren't breathing in the womb, and 5 minutes later, now that you out of the womb, we can't stop you from breathing or crying? And then you watch that baby grow and develop through childhood, then into adulthood. You're trying to tell me that all of that is the result of some mindless, random process? I beg to differ. Your cell phone didn't just come into existence. Somebody had to put that together. And the complexity of one cell in your human body is far more complex than these cell phones you have that allow you to text, watch movies, and play music. Isn't it funny that the least thing we do on our cell phone is what it was designed for in the first place? And that's to make phone calls. You Snapchatting, emoing, that's a new one they got. See what I'm saying? See how far I got ahead of y'all? You Facebooking, Instagramming, you got Pandora, Spotify, playing music round the clock, and don't even call people. Because you got call ID. It's a phone. And you do playing all kind of games, Roblox, Fortnite. These young people know what I'm talking about. Some of y'all parents looking like a deer caught in headlights. You better ask. Some of these games are trip. We must not struggle with the identity of God. Here's the second one. We must not struggle with the consistency of God. God is consistent. You know what that means? You can count on God to do his part. And he mentions that in Hebrews 11 and verse 6. Without faith it is impossible to please him, for he that cometh to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. God is consistent. If you do your part, God will always do his. In Proverbs 3, verse 5 through verse 6, we quote it often. Trust in the Lord with all thine heart. Lean not to thine own understanding. In all of thy ways acknowledge him. He shall direct thy path. You do your part, he will do his. Pastor, I don't feel I have any direction in my life. It's not because God isn't ready to direct you. Maybe your problem is you're not trusting in the Lord with all of your heart. You are leaning to your own understanding, and you refuse to acknowledge God in the making of every decision. That means before you do anything, you got to seek God's guidance on whether or not it's the right thing for you to do. Just because something is the right thing to do doesn't make it the right thing for you to do. You walk into a department store and an item you've been watching for the last 6 months, because some of y'all watch stuff, because you're praying it goes on sale. And you watch it. You've been watching it ever since they brought it out and hung it up on the rack. You've been watching it. You got some people in the store watching it for you. And here's how gangster we are. Don't nobody but saints do this. Here's how gangster saints are. Saints will go in them people's store, see the item you want, know you ain't got money to buy it no time soon, and hide it. You done took that dress, put it way over in the men's department, in between some suits, like them people ain't gonna find it. Hide this money. Hide this money. Done put it in a whole nother section, tucked all in the back. Hide it. God is absolutely and utterly consistent. If we do our part, he will do his part. And here's where some of us mess up. When you've been hiding that item for 6 months, and you walk in there one day, and it's on sale, 65% off. And when you get to the register, they take another 30% off whatever is left from the 65% off. Tell me when the last time you prayed about that. Our first response is, this God, him. God is all over this. This is the Lord. Oh Lord, I feel you, Jesus. I receive it, Jesus. We must not struggle with the consistency of God. You can count on God to do his part. Here's number 3. We must not struggle with the ability of God. Amen. Which means if you're going to be a person of faith, you've got to be settled on God's identity, settled on his consistency, and settled on his ability. You can't be struggling in these areas. Without faith, it is impossible to please him. For he that cometh to God must believe that he is, that's his existence, and that he is a rewarder. That's his ability. Yes. You cannot have faith in God if you don't believe what God can do. Yes. Yes. Now we got a whole Bible that tells us what God can do. But some of us don't need a Bible in our hands. We need a Bible in our hearts. Yes. 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 You ought to have your own faith file. Yes. You ought to have a file of all the things that God has done in and through your life. Yes. Yes. And everything in the file testifies that nobody could do this for me but the Lord. Yes. I wish I had somebody who knows what I'm talking about. Some things I prayed to God for, I prayed that they would never happen. I prayed that they would never happen. And God allowed it to happen not only in the opposite direction of what I was praying, he made it worse than I ever thought it would be. Only to reveal to me that he is just as much God in a hurricane as he is on a sunshiny day. I wish I had somebody who knew what I was talking about. He said, Thorpe, you praying that I won't let it get this low. I'm going to let it get so low until you got to jump up to touch the bottom. But in the midst of it all, I'm going to show you some stuff. I'm going to show you that can't nobody do you like Jesus. That can't nobody do you like the Lord. Deacon Clark, I grew up in church all my life listening to people talk about what God could do. How that he would be a shelter in the time of a storm. That he would be a bridge over troubled waters. That he would be a mother when mother is gone. A father when father is gone. I heard all of those testimonies. One of them that used to catch me really off guard, after they would say that he'll be a doctor in a sick room, then they said he'll be a lawyer in a courtroom. You know, I've had God to step in on my behalf and do what only God can do. I wish I had time. Pastor Darrell Coley said, I just can't tell it all. He said, if I had, I wish I had time because I just can't tell it all. God is a rewarder. That means he has ability. And you can search your Bible and find out that he has ability. I love, Sister Charlene, how God's ability manifests itself in the Word, because he's always doing different kinds of things. One day he's taking water, turning it into wine. The next day he's healing a woman who's been sick for 12 years, who has lost all of her money. Next day, a man named Zacchaeus is up in a tree, and he calls him down for the tree, fellowships with him at his house, and Zacchaeus is converted into faith in Jesus Christ. I love the fact that God can do all kinds of things, all different ways. You know why? So I can keep my mind off of what he's doing at your house and worry about what I need him to do at mine. So when you get a new car around the corner, that don't bother me. When you get a new house around the corner, that doesn't bother me, because a car is not what I need. A house is not what I need. What I need, money can't buy. I need a shelter in the time of an internal storm. I need him to make a way out of no way. I need him to be a heart fixer and a mind regulator. But the reason I don't get mad when I see your house or your car and you right round the corner from me is because the fact that God is blessing my neighbors means that God is in my neighborhood. And I am more concerned about being connected with the blesser than I am with the blessing. You got to recognize, ma'am, you got to recognize, sir, that God is able. He is a rewarder. Well, we must not struggle with the identity of God. We must not struggle with the consistency of God. We must not struggle with the ability of God. Here's the last thing. We must not struggle with the clarity of God. And this blows my mind. We must not struggle with the clarity of God. God is clear. Hey, here's the clarity as it relates to God. The more you focus on talking to him, the more he'll talk back to you. Let that settle in. Let that settle in with your deep self. The more you focus on talking to God, the more he's able to talk to you. And here's where some of us are. We mad that he's not speaking to us every 5 minutes. But you ain't carved out 30 minutes in the last 3 months to spend quality time with him. Unfortunately, some parents are raising strangers in their own house. They're already in school most of the day, and then when they're home, all at the dinner table. I was watching, this was by accident, purely by accident. I was watching Keeping Up with the Kardashians, purely by accident. Purely, because I don't normally watch things I can't understand. Something must have been on before that, and I didn't change the channel, it was still on. Kim Kardashian was announcing that she was being treated by her physician for pain in her thumbs from taking selfies. And she said, it's a condition. She's been diagnosed with a thumb disorder from taking selfies. And God is wondering, when are you going to move from selfies to some ussies? God is saying, can I get in a picture with you? Is it all about you? And then got the nerve to pray this 3-second prayer on your way to bed and expect a breakthrough in the morning. Now I lay me down to sleep. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. It's a whole different kind of prayer you need to be praying if you want the Lord to take you. We must not struggle with the clarity of God. The more you seek Him, the more you hear from Him. So Hebrews 11 and verse 6 says that without faith it is impossible to please Him. For he that cometh to God must believe that He is, and watch this last phrase, and that He is a rewarder of them that diligently seek Him. If you're going to get it from Him, you got to seek it. And you got to do it on a constant basis. And that brings us to Matthew's Gospel, chapter 17, verse 14 through verse 20. I just want to set the stage, and then I'm done for this morning. In Matthew 17, it occurs that this deliverance from this demon occurs after Jesus has spent time on a mountain in the presence of God in an experience that is called the Transfiguration. While Jesus was up there, His body and His clothing started to glow because the presence of God manifested itself so thickly. While there, two men appeared. Men who had been in heaven for centuries appeared that day on the mountaintop. One man's name was Elijah. The other man's name was Moses. And they all start carrying on a conversation with Jesus. Jesus had brought 3 disciples with Him to this mountaintop experience. He brought Peter, James, and John. He didn't bring them because they were better than the other disciples. He brought them because He needed them to handle more. And some of you are wondering why the Lord has elevated you to certain positions. It's not because you're better than your neighbor. He's just getting ready to post some stuff on you down the road. And He needs you to be able to handle more. Instead of bragging about the promotion, you need to be preparing your heart for what He's getting ready to pour on you as a result of the promotion. Peter spoke out while they were up there on the mountain. Jesus glowing. They'd never seen Him glow like this before. Voices speaking from heaven. Moses and Elijah are present. And Peter says, Lord, it is good for us to be here. Matter of fact, let's not leave. I had a problem with that. Because he had 9 other partners down in the valley. And he was married. He ain't care nothing about that when he's up there on the mountain. He said, Lord, let's just stay here and build 3 places of worship. One for you, one for Moses, one for Elijah. God spoke from heaven and said, this is my beloved son. Hear ye him. God was telling Peter, don't get it twisted. It's all about Jesus. So after they've been on this mountaintop experience, glowing with Jesus, they make their way back down to the base of the mountain the following day. They arrive off of the mountain the following day, only to discover that a massive crowd has gathered. And the 9 other disciples are surrounded by angry church leaders who are upset with them because they could not do what they were expected to do. These boys had cast out demons before, but this day there was a demon they could not cast out. Can I tell you why? Because all demons ain't the same. I want to help the deep folks with the bottle of oil in your purse or in your pocket. And you think that putting that oil on anything will bring instant deliverance. God bless your heart. But some stuff won't be fixed by the oil in your pocket. It's going to be fixed by the oil that's on your life. Because when the Lord anoints your life, you don't have to have a pocket or a pocketbook. But an anointing can rest on your life, and when you step into a room, it changes the atmosphere. So Jesus comes down off the mountain. A man runs up to him and says, Rabbi, teacher, I brought my son, catch this, I brought my son to your disciples because he has a lunatic spirit. And the spirit often tries to burn him to death or drown him to death. And your disciples could not cast him out. And then he says to Jesus, if you can do anything, help my son. Now, I would think, and I shared this earlier, but I would think that Jesus' heart would have been filled with such compassion. And he said, well, the man's son is in trouble. He came looking for me, couldn't find me, found my disciples, and they couldn't do anything about the problem. But Jesus' response, instead of being a compassionate response, was a harsh response. Jesus responded to them. I was concerned when I read this, and I've been reading it for years, but it just concerns me that Jesus was so harsh. In verse 17, he responded by saying, he said, y'all are some unbelieving perverts. It's in the text. It's in verse 17. You unbelieving and perverted generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring him here to me. I'm like, Reverend. And then they bring the boy to him. The demon in him is throwing the boy left and right, ripping him to shreds. You read this in the other gospel accounts. Jesus said, how long has he been like this? Now, if I had been Jesus, there are 2 occasions in Scripture where I would have questioned Jesus on the spot, in my flesh. I'd have questioned him on the spot. This is one of them. The other occasion where I would have questioned Jesus on the spot is when Jesus was on his way to Jairus' house to heal his daughter. A crowd was surrounding him, and Jesus stops the crowd and says, "Who touched me?" And he would not move forward until he found out who touched him. Finally, a woman stands up in the crowd and said, "It was me who touched the H-E-M on the H-I-M. It was me who touched the hem of your garment." And Jesus said, "Tell me your story." She said, "I've been sick for 12 long years. I've been hemorrhaging for 12 long years." She said, "I used to be wealthy, but I spent all of my money trying to get better. And instead of getting better, I've gotten worse." She said, "But I had faith that if I could just put my hands on it, that there would be enough power in your clothes." And the reason she only touched the hem of his garment is because that's all she could reach. I don't know if you've ever been down low enough until I'm talking about can't comb your hair low. I'm talking about don't want to brush your teeth low. Don't want to get out of bed low. Even when you find yourself that depressed, there's still a piece of Jesus you can get your hands on. Now, problem I would have had, if I'm Jairus, I'm like, ain't we supposed to be going to my house and heal my daughter? And you stopping, you done already healed the woman, and now you got to stop and talk to her? So that bothered me. And then while they were waiting, people came from Jairus' house and said, "Your daughter's already dead. Don't even bother Jesus anymore." And Jesus turned to Jairus and said, "Man, if you only believe today, you will see the salvation of the Lord." And they went on to the house. And Jesus put all the fake people out of the room. Because everybody in your life ain't there for the right reason. He put all the fake people out of the room. Pulled the little girl by the hand, life came back into her, gave her back to her daddy. That's one time I had a problem with Jesus. Here's another time that I almost had a problem with Jesus. Because one of the gospel accounts says that when Jesus saw the boy, demon just tearing the boy up. Jesus said, "How long has he been like this?" I'm like, "Excuse me? We finna play 20 questions? I've been waiting on you since yesterday, because I came to you trying to get my boy healed. You were nowhere to be found, so I took him to your disciples, 9 of them, and not one of them had enough power to heal him. And now you got questions?" So the man said, "Jesus, have mercy on us. Heal him. Jesus, be compassionate toward us. Heal him." Jesus had already said, "I'm tired of y'all." It's in verse 17. Jesus said, "I'm tired of y'all. You unbelieving, perverted generation. How long will I be with you? How long will I put up with you? Bring the boy to me." And that explains Jesus' anger, and it explains his hesitation. Because Jesus says, "Sir, say this out loud. Tell me so everybody can hear how long this boy has been like this." And the man said, "Ever since he was a little child." And here's the point I'm making. If their faith was where it should have been, the father never should have had to bring the boy to Jesus or the disciples. If his faith was where it should have been, he could have healed him at the house a long time ago. Jesus was saying, "You don't need me for this. You could have fixed this at the house a long time ago." And what I want to talk about the next time we get together on this text is, what is it that was wrong with their faith? Why was it so perverted? And the reason I want to talk about it is because some of us in here got some perverted faith too. Corrupt. Got the nerve to get mad at Best Buy when your computer won't work and they go to check it out and see that it's got all kind of viruses on it because of the websites you've been on you ain't had no business on. You wondering why you can't download because of some wicked stuff you've been doing that's short-circuiting what you ought to be getting from God. And somebody in here right now is upset with God, mad at him that he hadn't fixed something yet. We're standing. And the reality is, he can't fix what you won't face. Lord, do it. And he's saying, I'm wondering when you're going to stop doing it. Whatever it is. He said, yeah, I can fix it, but there's some stuff you need to do. When we get later on in this text, Jesus did not heal this man's son until the man activated his own faith. Yes. And then the disciples pull him to the side and say, why couldn't we do it? That's an important question. Because they had done it before. And Jesus said, it's because of your unbelief. He said, if your faith was where it should be, you can say to a whole mountain, get up from where you are and move to a whole different place. You can tell the mountain to get out of your way if your faith is right. Not just them, you. Not just you, me. We ought to have mountain-moving faith. And if we don't, it is partially because of our unbelief and our perversion towards the things of God. Which means stop getting mad at God about what you don't have. He's been trying to give it to you. It ain't even on layaway. It's already paid for.
Yes. Yes.
He's trying to give it to you. You just won't let him do it.